want to comment on what justice stands in Nigeria. As you know, if an armed robber comes with a gun and shoots, or comes to your house with a gun as an armed robber and he steals from you, the likelihood of that person getting killed through our social justice system is high. Because he's what? He's an armed robber. If we have a pen robber who sits in an executive office and steals $1 billion, the maximum he or she gets in our social system is 20 years of imprisonment. And that is if the person has nobody to plead on their behalf. This is the social justice we have. What does it encourage? That is something that the Rwandese have dealt with. The youth. Stringent efforts were made to build the Rwandan youth. What's happening with our youth? The Nigerian youth, if you look at it across the country, in the south, the youth are just busy organizing. The most lucrative trade is kidnapping. Who do you kidnap for the next 100 million naira? Now, what you even ask is in dollars. You look at the youth in the north, where you have the saddest situation. The youth in the north sleep all day and wake up in the evening and roam around the street, buy more codeine, and drink codeine in the night. There's hardly any extended family in northern Nigeria that does not have one young man or young woman that has drug addiction. Yet, we hide. Yet, we look the other side. Yet, we pretend that there's nothing wrong. Now, the fear is that it might just have happened in Borno and the Northeast, that the youth were ignored, they were used by political class, and that culminated in the different brands of Boko Haram and political haram. What we have now is that if we do not look at the issue of the youth, a situation will come where you and I will no longer be at peace. Even in this comfortable area, Abuja, where we think we're safe, I don't think it's true. If we do not look at the issue of social justice, we need to realize that the social justice we're looking about is about our driver, is the cook in my house, is the security man in my guard. My daughter gets taken to school by a driver. Who feels unsafe in this country? Who feels a sense of inequity? My house is guarded by a guardman. Who feels a strong sense of inequity? My cook belongs to the same category. And I think I'm safe. We're joking. Addressing the issue of social justice is no longer about being altruistic, it's about survival. If we do not, we've had a couple of women being taken hostages by their staff, killed, taking a couple of millions and put in their freezers. 3 have been recorded in this country. A couple of men will go down the drain as well. So for me, the issue of social justice is not an issue of being good. It's an issue of survival. We either do it or we all go down the drain. There's no two ways about that. I'll leave the issue of economy to Professor Soludo, but I'll take the issue of governance. Since the genocide, Rwandan government has been led by Paul Kagame, who is my hero, a Tutsi growing up as a refugee in neighboring Uganda. Kagame led the Rwandan Patriotic Army in its resistance against the Hutu militias, wreaking carnage in the country. After the genocide ended in July 1994, he became vice president and later rose to the position of a president. Last year, he did exceptionally well by every standard, by every analysis. Everybody declared him the best president of his time, the best economy of their time. Last year, the Rwandese decided to change their constitution to make sure Kagame stays. A lot of the countries of the world are busy criticizing and abusing him. I wonder, who says 4 years is a magic word? Whose definition is 4 years? If the Rwandese decide that they are at a stage in their development where they need the same leader to carry them through the same spirit for the next stage. Who in the world has the right to tell them what to do? This, for me, is where Nigeria needs to go. A self-definition of identity. Stop being robots. And let's define our identity and what we need. Not just listen to what anybody says, because when the chips are down, nobody is going to come. When Rwandese were being killed, when they were busy killing themselves, nobody went to them. When we were busy killing ourselves in the northeast, nobody came. It took President Buhari to keep running. Everybody was saying, can't he stay? He was running from country to country to country, trying to get support. He's still trying to get support. Nobody is addressing our South-South issues. So the truth is that nobody is going to answer our issues. We need to do it ourselves. The earlier we start defining our own identity, the better for us. Is this 5 minutes, including the bonus, ladies, 5 minutes? Because I really want to go to my conclusion, and I hope that everybody is going to get the 20-something page and read. Now, Nigeria, what has occurred to me, in looking at the 4 sectors, Nigeria had never liked ideas. If you look at the documents, the policies, Nigeria has one of the best policy in every sector. Every time there's something new, we quickly develop a policy. I remember I was in one of these international meetings somewhere in Africa, and the Nigerian country was not represented. Our ambassador quickly went there. We sat down, we helped him understand what was happening, and as soon as the documents were drafted, he went and signed. Nigeria was the signatory. We clapped and we went. The Nigerian government was not even there. So we sign to everything. We have the best policies. But where I struggle is we seem to misunderstand having policy to implementing policy. We see good policy as an end in themselves. This we need to move forward. I think we need to stop making new policies. We need to dust our policies. We need to see how to implement our policies. We should make mistakes. Mistakes are part of learning. When we do make mistakes, we will move on. In conclusion, Nigeria's promising future at independence cannot be understated. The failure of our system to rise up to the challenges that we face as a country is reiterated time and time again. Today, we are witnessing the reemergence of factions such as Boko Haram, who are so disillusioned by the idea of one Nigeria that they want their own state. The cries for Biafra, which seems never to have died down in the first place, is now being heard. In the oil-rich states, young people frustrated by their situation of poverty and inequity are turning into vigilante groups, kidnapping and vandalizing their environment, committing crimes, and nothing gets done. Young men and women in northern Nigeria are addicted to codeine and codeine derivatives, sleeping during the day and roaming the streets in the evenings. On top of all these iniquities, on top of this, inequality between the rich and the poor is ever increasing. And we watch as elite class live at the expense of the masses. All this coupled with ineffective government, time and time again forces us to ask, what went wrong? What are we doing wrong? What can we do to fix it? If Rwanda can do it, I believe we can do it, and we can do it even better. When we have an effective and sincere leadership, and I mean effective and sincere leadership, a leadership invested in development of a nation, the children will go to school, receive good quality education, and become leaders of great caliber who possess the will, the capacity, and the ability to nurture our growth. Our healthcare system will improve with the times and become accessible regardless of social class. the majority of people will be living above poverty lines and with decent 3 meals in their families. The irony is that people only get leaders that they deserve, meaning that we are all responsible for the action or inaction of our leadership. They are corrupt because we either encourage corruption or we tolerate it. They are inefficient because we condone inefficiency. And above all, our leaders are not serious because we all are not serious. When we have leaders that believe in the entity called Nigeria, perhaps we're going to have a country where we develop. In my whole lifetime, I'm 50, so in my adult lifetime of probably the last 30 years, I've seen probably less than a conglomeration of 36 months where I believe we've had leaders that believe in this country called Nigeria. I do not believe that we've had enough of. And until such a time where we individually believe in this country, where when I'm asked, Miro, who are you? I'll say I'm Nigerian. And when I'm asked, I'll say nothing else. If you go around this hall and you say, who are you? Where are you from? You start hearing, people don't even say I'm from Katsina State. People say I'm from, is it Daura or Katsina Central or something. And as you even see leaders, look at any governor in this country. Majority of his kitchen cabinet are from his local government or his senatorial district. Is this how we hope to develop? In my opinion, no. Until we begin to call a spade, and until we begin to be honest with ourselves, I'm afraid we still have a long way to go. But as an optimistic Nigerian, I believe that the change, Mr. Vice President, that we're talking about is really a change around social justice, social equity, but above all, that you guys will show us by example that you truly believe in this country called Nigeria. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bandara, for this inspiring speech. I now call on my neighbor, Professor Hudu, to address us.
Did you say 50? Well, I was asked to speak. Mr. Vice President, the Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I have been warned even before now that I didn't have to make a long speech, and true to type, I assure you, I haven't got any written paper to give you. I will only make a few comments on the ones that I haven't delivered. That's the first point. The second point is that we have a saying in my place that someone is called upon in a meeting to speak, and he simply says, others have said what he wanted to say. So at this point, with General Awai and Dr. Mandara, I can always say they have said what I want to say. But let me just go straight to make just a few extempore comments. I just early hours of this morning, I just scribbled 1, 2, 3, 4 bullet points to speak to. And I will just go to them. A question is asked, is Nigeria rising? And I want to go ahead and maybe give my perspective in answering that question. The first is to say that I believe Nigeria seems to have, to some degree, been going in circles. That's my first point. And I just want to read 2 things for you. Quote, the aim of the Revolutionary Council is to establish a strong, united, and prosperous nation, free from corruption and internal strife. Continue. Our enemies are the political profiteers, the swindlers, the men in high and low places that seek bribes and demand 10%. Those that seek to keep the country divided permanently so that they can remain in office as ministers and blah, 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 the tribalists, the nepotists, and so on and so forth. End of that one. That was Nzogo's speech in 1966. Read Gowon's speech, January 15, 1970, to accept the surrender of Biafra, and you see the same trends. I've tried to read the speeches that were made after every change of government in Nigeria since independence, the Tafawa Balewa's independence speech, and all through all of them. But this particular one, I just want to refer you just a few sentences. January 1, 84, General Sani Abacha. Blah, 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 blah. We are all living witnesses to the great economic predicament and uncertainty which an inept and corrupt leadership has imposed on our beloved nation for the past 4 years. I am referring to the harsh, intolerable conditions under which we are now living. Our economy has been hopelessly mismanaged. We have become a debtor and beggar nation. Blah, 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 blah. Well, in some states, workers are being owed salary arrears of 8 to 12 months. And in others, there are threats of salary cuts. Yet our leaders revel in squandermania, corruption, and indiscipline, and continue to proliferate public appointments in complete disregard of our stark economic realities, blah, 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 blah. You can read quite a few of this. And as you read this, we're talking about post-66. Are we rising? The first thing is to, so I share in the dismay that's been expressed by the two previous speakers. You know, in some sense, we seem to be going in circles. The cup is half full than half empty. It's our favorite pastime as Nigerians. We only have a catalog of the wars. It's part of us. But I remain optimistic and hopeful that this potentially largest, currently the largest black nation on earth, and potentially one of the largest economies in the world, can keep rising. Yes, to answer the question, is Nigeria rising? I will say my answer is a qualified yes. With oil as the oxygen, and more than $1 trillion from oil, and which has managed to keep the looting elite, united and organized, and managed to keep our economy fueling. Today, the Nigerian economy, in my view, yes, relative to our potentials, it has underperformed. Relative to our potentials, it has underperformed. But is the trend upwards, especially in economic terms? Yes. The HDI and all the other things, they are not looking very pretty. But again, you go to where we are coming from. It's about $550 billion economy with a per capita income of 2,700. Relatively, with the recent rebased economy, relatively more diversified. Relatively, I said this. A dysfunctional diversification that has bypassed the manufacturing. You see, the services now dominate. We've gone from primary to services, bypassing manufacturing. We have one, on nation state, we've managed to keep Nigeria as one country. That was the goal of the 1966 coup, to keep us one and prosperous. But we have failed to build a nation. We still have a divided country with multiplicity of nationalities pulling in different directions. On corruption, as you saw from that first speech, we've moved from 10% to sharing a whole security budget, also, and so on and so forth. But relatively improved on the corruption perception index. The challenges are enormous. Urbanization, terrorism, unemployment, inequality, exacerbated poverty, and so on and so forth. But so also are the potentials. This country is projected, PwC, Citibank, chief economists, and so on, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that by 2050, this country is projected to be between the 6th and 9th largest economy in the world, with a size of between 7.5 to 9.5 trillion. And we would then be like a middle-income country. The population is projected to be about 440 million people by 2050. 440. And that will make us the third largest country in population terms in the world by 2050, just behind India and China. A big question, in other words, the potentials are there. These are some projections, but for me it's a linear projection. I mean, don't never mind about how they got computed all of those. So I'm just saying this as a footnote, that we have potentials to become even bigger, to rise. But this cannot happen on its own. It depends on what happens today. The choices we make today will determine whether we go up or down. The challenges are immense. I've listed quite a whole number of them, including the fact that the commodity super cycle that actually propelled, became the oxygen that kept us going for a while, is over. And it's not likely to return anytime soon. And so for us to begin to think of a post-oil economy is the agenda that unfortunately Professor, the Vice President, and his team are called upon at this historic moment to undertake. The party is over, and you have to lead us to a new way, new path, with the destination still there, but you need new instruments and new techniques to take us there. I have quite a number of that I wouldn't even want to bore you with domestic challenges and so on and so forth. But there is something I want to draw your attention to, because people often talk about agriculture. Agriculture now accounts for about 22% of our GDP in terms of the structure. Great potentials. This country has about 930-something thousand square meters, a third of, say, a country like Congo. But about 35% of our land is under threat of desertification. Interestingly, it is the area that has the largest land mass, especially northeast. The 12 or 11 states that are mostly in danger of the threats from Boko Haram and so on happen also to be the places with the greatest threat of desertification and under pressure to migrate. And with the issues of citizen-settler conflict in the next 50 years, the question is, where will Nigerians live in 2050? We're going to have a lot of migration. What's the potential for agriculture with only about 1% of the agric land under irrigation? So I ask a question. If oil and gas and agriculture and even solid minerals are going to have very limited impact on employment generation in the near term, the question is, which sectors will provide the jobs for the 440 million people by 2050? This is even more so, especially given that we have one of the highest urbanization rates in the world at about 5.3%. But we have bypassed manufacturing. This is a question. So for this you can write big books, as it were. But let me just quickly say a few things as we think about the next Nigeria. After 2015, nevertheless, what my friend Issa thinks, that Nigeria didn't start in 1914. Well, the amalgamation took place in 1914. Africans were still moving around before then anyway, but Nigeria was born in 1914, I insist. So 2014 was the first 100 years. How do we go the next 100 years? That is the big question. And I think Our underperformance in the past, in my view, was as a consequence of some inconsistent instruments, dysfunctional institutions, and predatory politics. The Constitution that we have is designed for sharing and consuming the oil rent. It is not one designed for production. I'm not sure how far you can go by, oh, we fix roads, we fix infrastructure, and everything will happen. It won't automatically happen. We have a dysfunctional system, a dysfunctional institutional foundation. So you take 10 steps forward and you take 11 back and you start again. So Nigeria will need skills, technology, and infrastructure, plus institutions and their strategy to unleash a new competition. If the rise in the next Nigeria is going to be sustainable, there is a regime shift. The oil is over. We are now in a new era. And that new era, fortuitously, coincides with the coming of a new government. But with the prof leading the charge on the economy, I think we can be more confident. There are ethnic nationalities and still the inconclusive search for nationhood. We have been in denial, I believe, as a country. And I believe that Obafemi Awolowo and Sardauna were right. We need to talk. I believe Nigeria has been building a 100-story building on a quicksand. And we're seeing what is going on now. Nigeria is ranked now for about 4 or 5 consecutive years as number 5 on the failed state index. Many people don't seem to pay attention to this, but the world does. The world is going in different directions. If we have to plan, my first point, Mr. Vice President and ladies and gentlemen, is that Nigeria is an inconclusive federation. It's an inconclusive federation, and Nigeria needs a coherent nationhood plan or agenda for a more perfect union. That should be the starting point. My thesis is that we must be able to combine perestroika with glasnost. So that's talking in the Russian Federation's parlance. Trying the economic agenda under the new regime without the right political architecture, we will be building on a quicksand. We are not building to last. We need a coherent, consistent economic agenda. Mere nationalism or some emotional populism will not substitute for a rigorous economic agenda. A post-oil economy in the context of current challenges and realities of the global economic system requires new tools to overcome. For starters, ladies and gentlemen, my view is that to craft this new agenda, we must defeat the old, tried but failed economic policy agenda. We cannot make progress in the 21st century with the tools and ideas of the mid-20th century. Many of these have been tried in our history, they failed. They have been tried elsewhere in the world, they failed. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. And so what I think about the challenge of overcoming what I call insular intellectualism, or the so-called Nigeria's exceptionalism. Nigeria is so different that supply curve slopes downwards and demand curve slopes upwards, and so on. We are so different that the basic fundamental laws of economics that have propelled the East Asian economies and the other emerging economies won't work here. We've got to get something and go back to the 1940s and 50s. It hasn't worked anywhere and we can't go back to the past. Rigorous empiricism must be the guiding post rather than partial analysis. So defeating old bad ideas can even be more important than thinking of the new ones to come. And history beckons on the new government. The government is challenged to be innovative and to have a transformational change, but without oil. But there is yet a second thing, I believe, where I don't envy this government. It's both a challenge and an opportunity. This is going to be the first government that will probably undertake a transformational change, but without the external agencies of coercion and reward. There's no IMF conditionalities or World Bank conditionalities. The debt relief is over. You have unfettered policy space. It's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge. And I want to say that the government, from what I can read, seems to have its heart in the right places. And no doubt has ample compassion and populism. On the one hand, struggling with the need to take some bold, audacious steps to re-engineer a broken system. This is a democracy, so we understand the dilemma. You have the next election to go for in the next 3 years. You don't want to rock the boat, otherwise the people will come after you. But that is the dilemma, Mr. Vice President, ladies and gentlemen. You have 3 budgets, 3 annual budgets to the next election to begin to do all this change that we're talking about. One is already almost gone. But I must say, my view, not very flattering, is that the current budget under consideration is largely a missed opportunity, and in my view, largely more of the same. Yes, it contains some tinkering, some good innovative ideas, tinkering at the margins here and there in terms of programming, and I applaud the government on employment of 500,000 teachers, free education for some selected sectors, and fighting corruption and all of that. Wonderful. A couple of innovative ideas there, which I applaud. I also appreciate the haste with which this was prepared. But the budget remains largely minuscule. I see some people describe it as expansionary. No, it is not. As a percentage of GDP, because you have to scale it. It's not in nominal terms. The nominal GDP has gone from 90-something to 100-and-something projected for the year. So if you scale your budget as a percentage of GDP, it's not any different from the previous budget. It's still 5 point little thing of GDP. Not expansionary for an economy in the state in which we are. It's just about $20–30 billion, depending on the exchange rate you use. Maybe the fire department of New York's budget or so. It's less than $150 per capita per citizen. But it has a historic 37% budget deficit within it. We have never had it before this way. Unlike before, the total recurrent budget is still higher than the total revenue. That's the 30% is for capital. That actually hides quite a lot. The truth is that your recurrent, you are borrowing 37% of the budget. I mean, deficit is 37% of the budget, whereas capital is 30%. The implication is that 7% is actually going into recurrent. So we are still borrowing for recurrent, just the trend within the previous. And I said to myself that this is seriously a missed opportunity to set new bold ideas for a post-oil economy. An alternative budget, I believe, with different tax and exchange rate configurations, waste management, could get you 10 to 15 trillion naira budget for starters. I don't know any country or many countries in the world, even in Africa, whose annual budgets, even when you combine states and the federal budget, it's still barely about 10% of our GDP. We should be moving towards 15, 20 for the kind of transformation that is being promised. Yes, the next key, I don't think I want to continue on this. I'm looking at my time. But I just want to say, ladies and gentlemen, I was asked by the moderator things I was going to talk about, the exchange rate and central bank and so on and so forth. I would disappoint you. I will avoid that part. The only bit I can say is to thank the government and the central bank for what I call the preliminary step it has taken in trying to dismantle the strangulating coterie of ad hoc restrictions that are hemorrhaging the economy. I think the first step in trying to dismantle some of this should be commended, days or weeks to come, because my hypothesis is that if you continue along that path, the economy will be underperforming by at least 2% of GDP. That's my computations. And it's a dangerous route to go. We can do something bold, audacious, and get the economy back on a track. In conclusion, I just want to say, like I said, mine is just to make comments, a quick haphazard comments here and there. Commend the government for what is going so far. I think its heart is in the right direction. The fighting corruption is a very good one. I say the compassionate component, the social programs being put in place, albeit that we urge them to be sure that they plan before rollout. They have the facts and not go back to planning without facts. I think the minimum wage announced by the previous government was announced at a function before somebody did the numbers. Well, I know the labor guy, I know where you guys were, and urge you, this government, at an auspicious time in our history, there's no question you love Nigeria, but you need the right instruments. The drumbeat has changed, the dance steps must have to change at a fundamental bit. With all this, I have absolutely no doubt, if we can get our political and economic reform agenda simultaneously pushed through, you would have laid the foundation for the next Nigeria. Thank you very much, and God bless.
I'll now call on the MC to introduce the Vice President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the privilege. And on an introductory note, let me quickly allude to a few things I heard some of the speakers say. Particularly, they keep dumping the things at the feet of the media. Yes, the media has a role to play. And one privilege that we have in the media is that we are able to speak the truth to power if we want to. But do we?
Sorry, I have to cut you. I asked you to introduce the Vice President.
That's what I'm doing, sir.
No, you are not doing that.
That's what I'm doing, sir. I'm leading up to that. Yes, sir. So, because some of these things are the things that the VP will also have to address. So thank you very much to all the speakers. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the honor to introduce the Vice President. Of course, the Vice President needs no further introduction. He's already been introduced and over-introduced. And like we said, it is his preference to speak after he has listened to everybody who spoke. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, may you, with a round of applause, welcome the Vice President, Federal Republic of Nigeria, Professor Yemi Osinbajo.
Thank you very much. Please sit. Thank you. The chair of this occasion and former head of the civil service, Alhaji Adamu Fika. It's a pleasure to make your acquaintance today. I intend to make use of the library, if you will permit me. I've already asked a few people who know how to get there. The former minister of the Federal Capital Territory, who is also here, Dr. Aliyu Modibo, and the chairman of Media Trust, our host. I'd also like to thank you very much for this great opportunity to be here. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I will just speak randomly. There's so much that there is obviously to comment about and to speak about, but I'll just be as random as I can so I can cover as many points as I would like to mention. I spent a lot of my time, I spent a lot of years in the university and also practicing law, and the 8 years between 1999 and 2007 as Attorney General in Lagos State. Most of that time I criticized the federal government almost on a daily basis. And I recall that a few weeks ago I was talking to my wife and criticizing the federal government. And my wife had to remind me, but I thought you guys were now. Frankly, sometimes one tends to forget that, as they say, the buck stops somewhere around my table. But as I said to President Buhari while we were campaigning, and he said I should look at the faces of the young men who are pressing their faces against the bus that we're in Zamfara State. And he said I should look at their faces. He said, well, what do you think, what can you tell about these people? And I said, well, I really can't see much. I see that they're excited to see us. And he said, let me tell you what, as far as these people are concerned, from the second day that we're sworn in, if we win this election, they expect to see all their problems solved. So I said to him, I said, it is you they expect to solve the problem. But we know that, at least today I know that just as he reminds me constantly, we have a duty to do our very best, as honestly, as forthrightly as we can, using all of the best tools and the best things that all of the best people that we can find. The question today is Nigeria rising. For me, I think there is no question at all that despite everything, our country is rising. Despite all of whatever it is that we see, our nation is rising, but it's a severely challenged nation. First thing I'd like to say is that the development of nations anywhere is based largely on an elite consensus of one kind or the other. In other words, the elite must agree that the nation or the group is worth building. The elite must agree. The professional elite, the religious elite, the political elite must agree that there is something worth doing about the nation. And the nation is worth anything at all. And that consensus has been addressed, and issues around it have been addressed both by Mero and even earlier by General Aguai, that we need to find some kind we need to find that consensus. Unfortunately, that consensus has eluded us for very, very many years. And this explains why it is that despite all that we should have achieved as a nation, we appear, as Professor Soludo has said, to be going round and round in circles. It is an elite consensus that brought the great countries of the world where they are today. When you look at just simple things like the American Constitution or even the agreements to form a union, people came together, diverse tribes, diverse races and all of that came together to say, let's agree that this enterprise is worth pursuing. Let's agree on the values. Let's agree on the minimum that we'll accept. Let's agree on a justice system. And let's agree that this justice system is one where none will be above the law. And then let's implement it rigorously. The individuals within that elite group may even disagree, as must be the case. But there must be no doubt at all in anyone's mind that unless there is within this geographical space, or this, if you like now, geopolitical space, unless we agree as to how to govern this space, as to how and what it will take to develop this country, we will always appear to be, as Professor Soludo has suggested, going round and round in circles. It's the absence of an elite consensus that has brought us to a place where people have dived into their ethnic conclaves. And just as Mero agonized, today we find some of our best minds, some of those who were great leaders in the past. I was speaking to a group of leaders from a part of the country just last week. Amongst them, retired permanent secretaries of great repute, retired they're professors who had taught in universities for many years. But they now came representing a little zone within a state, And for me, it was so depressing that we find ourselves, and it is because of the failure of that elite to define for us a future and to say this is how to get to the future, that everybody is now in their tribal zones. So I made a comment recently about place of residence being more important than indigenship, and I got a whole deluge of comments, people saying only bastards will turn around and say that their ethnic groups or whatever it is may not matter. But the truth of the matter is that while we are proud, or while we are proud of where we are from, it is impractical, completely impractical, to assume that any form of ethnic nationalism in a country such as this is what will take this country forward. Whoever it is that says, I want to go my own way, whether it is the southwest, southeast, northeast, wherever, is bound to find that the reason why Nigeria is an attractive proposition, economically at least, is because of our size. That's the reason why we're an attractive proposition. Look at all the small countries around us. The reason why we are this great country to them is because we have a huge market and the possibilities are limitless. That is the reason. So any tiny little country, and when I heard, when we talk about, some of these countries, Rwanda, Botswana, and all of these countries, now many of them are setting great examples of good governance. But when you look at actual numbers, these are tiny countries compared to Nigeria, tiny little countries compared to Nigeria in terms of actual numbers. Lagos State, is larger in terms of its economy than about 12, 13, or 14 African countries. Lagos State alone. That's put together, exactly, put together. So we're dealing with the sort of country that we're talking about is a country that has the potential to be not just the giant of Africa, but a major giant, economic giant in the world. That's the kind of country we're talking about. We can't, sometimes, the other day somebody was talking about Tanzania and all of that. And I said, look, Tanzania's IGR, its whole revenue, is still 1/6 of that of Lagos State. 1/6. I'm not talking of Nigeria, 1/6 of Lagos. So these countries, as I said, offer good example. Many times when countries do well, we're bound to speak well about them. And, a lot of these countries have shown great example. But I think it's important for us to understand that we have a duty, and here I refer to the elite, to ensure that we are able to deliver a nation. And this I think, is a challenge that we face in the coming years. As Meru has said, is a leadership question. And leadership is not just political leadership. It's not just political leadership. It's leadership, it's religious leadership. It's leadership in education. It's leadership across the whole spectrum. Now, the other thing that I'd just like to mention is with respect to what I think we may need, what I think we need to do going forward. The problem sometimes is not as, and again, I like to refer to what Meru said about the capacity, about implementing our ideas. We have great policies, excellent policies, and in practically every sector we have great policies. But what seems to me to be lacking, and what I've spent a lot of time trying to address, is the whole question of the state's capacity to perform, the state's capacity to do things. Now that has nothing to do with democracy, frankly. It is more a question of what is the capacity of the state to deliver on practically anything, even to build a road, to plan, to design a road and to deliver a road, to plan, to design a bridge or railway and to deliver it. To plan a legal system that is effective, a legal system that protects private property, a legal system that is able to punish wrongdoing, and that can do so speedily, swiftly, and at least in a manner that is considered fair by most. It is that capacity that I believe we need to spend a lot of time developing. We need to develop that capacity. When you look at it, some people say, oh, it's rich people who escape justice in Nigeria. It's not true. The truth is that everybody escapes justice in Nigeria, everybody, whether they are rich or poor. There's nobody who doesn't escape justice. If you look at our numbers in prisons, if you look at the prison numbers, just as an example, at the moment we have just over 12,000 convicted prisoners in Nigeria, just over 12,000 in all of our prisons put together, just over 12,000, and we are 170 million people. America has about double our number, 300 million people, and they have 2.2 million people in jail, 2.2 million compared to 12,000. So it's either we are very well-behaved people, that we have that kind of small number, or there's something wrong with the system. So really the question is one of developing the capacity, and we need to work hard on developing the capacity. I think Professor Soludo talked about institutions, about building institutions, but all those things can be done, in my view, and a lot of time, we're spending a lot of time thinking through this and trying to work through this. How do we ensure that we can deliver the kind of capacity that can do most of the things that we need to get done. And I think that one of the very important areas is fixing our justice system. Education is absolutely important. There is no running away. There's no way you can build a serious economy without investing in education. But not just investing in education. What exactly are the strategies? What exactly are we trying to do? What types of people are we trying to produce? What type of students are we trying to produce? We've been in debates and all sorts of questions around what can we do with our educational system. My frank approach to it and the way that I've tried to push this is that you don't necessarily need to fix the entire educational system all at once, but you must have clear and innovation in technology. So we cannot have primary schools where people are not taught, where people are not encouraged to use technology and are not taught programming, for example. That's where we must start from. And the truth is that we can't start it everywhere. You cannot have, we simply don't have the capacity to do it everywhere. But we must be able to, we must decide that we must start, that we must start this kind of educational curricula in several different places where the capacity already exists, either in terms of resources or whatever. But we must begin. We can't wait until we have enough money to do this. So that's just primary education. Teacher training is absolutely crucial. We've got to be able to get our teachers trained in a manner that reflects what our objectives are, our educational objectives are, and where we intend to go in the next few years. We're looking now at teacher training. We're looking at how to improve that. First, we're encouraging education by giving scholarships. You know, technology, we're giving scholarships. I'm sure those of us who listened to the budget speech, we're giving scholarships for science, technology, engineering, and maths, as well as for education. This is to encourage education. But teacher training, changing the curriculum, is absolutely important. We have a team now that's working seriously on issues of teacher training, trying to take a second look at what is really required to train the kinds of teachers that will make a real difference in the lives of children, and will work with the objectives and policies of government to be able to achieve to be able to get us to where we want to go in the next few years. There's also for the present government the whole question of what Professor Soludo described as compassionate provisions in the budget. Frankly, I'm not so sure that it's just a matter of compassion. And in that respect, I do not think that's a matter of compassion. As a matter of fact, my sense of this is that when we prepare our budgets in Nigeria, we've always tended, and economic policy generally, we've always tended to approach it, almost from the perspective of a middle-income country, of a country that has everything in place. And so what we need to do is to tweak the fiscals here and there, have some indices right, and hopefully if industry can move us forward, we'll provide enough wealth for everybody. But the truth is that it probably accounts for the reason why poverty continues, because we have 110 million extremely poor people, and they're getting poorer by the day. And despite all of our GDP growth figures, somehow or the other, we just, the poverty numbers continue to increase. So my sense is that unless we're able to address those questions, first of all directly, not as a matter of compassion, but as a matter of economic survival, because really, if you have 110 million poor people, and you're extremely poor people, and you don't have some kind of social protection or social investment, we are merely waiting for doomsday. We're waiting for doomsday, because how quickly can our economy generate what is required to answer to the problems of these very poor people? And I think that when you look at it, what we've tried to do in the budget is basically to look at, for example, the 500,000 teachers that we're trying to get. These are graduates who are basically out of school. We need to retrain them and put them back and put them into teaching. Now, the retraining itself will take probably about 4 months or so, or 5 months, and because they're already graduates. So basically what you are taking them through is just pedagogy. There's no, they already are, in some senses, knowledgeable enough about what they're doing. But it answers two questions. For us, it fills in a gap because there's a huge shortage of teachers, especially teachers in the sciences, a huge shortage of teachers. Secondly, it puts these people to work, and they're working, you know, at least it puts them to work, and they're earning some pay, but most importantly, they are working. They're able to work, and they're improving our educational system. We're also looking at providing technical and vocational education for non-graduates, artisans, and all that. And as we provide for them, trying to give them real opportunities. And we're looking at doing 700,000 as part of the 500 billion which we're setting aside for social investments. Part of this also is the conditional cash transfer for the very poorest. But we're looking at that in phases. We're looking at giving conditional cash transfers for, you know, those who have children, for the very poorest who have children in school and who are participating in immunization. The truth is that these categories of people are people who are more or less alienated. And the more of our people that are alienated, the worse for us. We can't today, you know, account for the numbers in the way, you know, we just can't account for the large numbers of those who are completely out of the reckoning, you know. We were looking at, the other day, we were looking at the figures of market women because we're looking at how to effectively give loans to market women, microcredit loans to market women across the country in order to improve their inventory and also do some financial planning and all that. We're looking at that with the Bill Gates people, with Mero and Co. and the World Bank. And also, we're putting in some resources into it. But we believe that we must, I mean, these are our small scale enterprises. We believe that we must do something about about improving what it is they do and hoping that they can be more productive. The point that Professor Soludo has made about bypassing manufacturing is an important point, you know, because of course, for many, you know, we recognize that the old tricks still work, as they say, you know, from farming to factory and all that. It's very difficult today, and I have not seen the model yet that has managed to bypass manufacturing and succeed. I think that we need to pay particular attention to manufacturing. And that's going to involve offending to some extent some of our WTO allegiances and all of that, because some protectionism is necessary. Some subsidized credits will be necessary. We just have to take steps that will encourage manufacturing, encourage local industry. We really have no choice but to take some of those steps. Again, agriculture, because power, agriculture and all of that, we need to do quite a bit of work in that area. Agriculture, you know, is crucial, and all the challenges that you mentioned are challenges that we really have to take on board, especially desertification. And we note, of course, that in these areas, these are the bread basket, if you like, of Nigeria, and we have to deal with issues of erosion and desertification quickly if our agricultural plans will not be jeopardized. But we're looking at the use of improved seedlings, especially for rice production, wheat production, and all of that. Improving acreage in agriculture, and then trying to service that whole value chain. Of course, getting the private sector involved directly in agriculture, they had their fingers burnt at different times. So there's a bit of reluctance. But I think that it's becoming more obvious with with the fall in oil prices. It's becoming more obvious that we have to do something about agriculture, and even the private sector has to come, and work in agriculture and do a bit more down that whole value chain. I'll just leave power. We, of course, have to deal with that and all other infrastructural issues, just so that I can round up and conclude. The budget, the budget. Frankly, I'm sure that if you had heard any of my comments before the budget, before we actually began the budget process, I was saying that a minimum of 8 trillion was what we required, But frankly, if you just look at the figures, and I'm going to, as I said, I've already said I'm going to come and consult with Professor Soludo again, how we can get, to this 20 trillion. Because just looking at the figures, we have a deficit of over 2.2 trillion, as you've noticed, 37% deficit. Our debt to revenue was already 38%, which meant that we're already over what is considered safe, heading for the 40s. Now, if we had increased, because again, the only way is either we ramp up, domestic revenue mobilization, get our FIRS and all that to work in terms of revenue, work the customs and all of that, those are our main non-oil resources. Some people said increase VAT. The argument about, we're the lowest VAT in Africa or anywhere, we need to move from 5% to 10% and all of that. But why? What prevailed, the argument that prevailed is, look, at the moment you are collecting 20% of those vatable products. You are collecting 20% only. Why don't you just increase that, before you start trying to increase? Before you start trying to increase VAT, first increase your coverage, and then we can start talking about increasing, which is a way we thought would increase revenue. But the point of the matter, though, is that if you have deficit at 2.3 trillion, and you have to borrow for the rest, or for most of what we're borrowing about 1.8, we're borrowing about 1.8 trillion. Now, if you're borrowing 1.8 trillion, some of that is from the domestic market, which already, as you know, is we're almost busting in the seams in the domestic market. The ceiling is there. We are crowding out the private sector already. Everybody is complaining. So we have a problem there. And then, of course, borrowing from we have a ceiling in our foreign borrowing. We still have some headroom there, so we can still borrow a bit more there. But for me, the problem really is, how do you move from, even if you are going to borrow, how much can you possibly borrow? And realistically, we're thinking that non-oil revenues, we're looking at, in fact, they say it's ambitious, we're looking at 35 to 40% increase in non-oil revenues. Now, some people say that's conservative, some people say it's too high. But if we look at that 35% in non-oil revenues, add that to our borrowings, we're still, not able to go beyond where we are in terms of the size of the budget. But I agree with you that what we really need is a much bigger budget, because even if you look at infrastructure alone, we have huge areas.